crucifixion, which is the actual stoning, I'm impressed. I don't know about you, but I'm impressed with the remarkable manner in which Stephen, the first martyr, died. The things that he prayed and how and what he said is so intriguing because it's similar to somebody else. And so this is what we're going to do this morning as we look at this first martyr. So there you go. The first 8 verses, he delves into common ground. He delves right into the common ancestry. And what is really interesting to me, he does this in such an indirect way, very subtly. And he does it by insinuation. That caught my attention as I studied this past week. And that's how he approaches this whole discussion about the history of the Jews. And this is exactly what he does. Let me tell you about our common ancestry. And then that's precisely what he does. So in verses 8, it's the call to Father Abraham to leave Mesopotamia. Anybody remember, I can't explain it, but for eons and eons of time, I have never forgotten what Mesopotamia means. I don't know, I can't explain it. But remember, it means the land between the rivers. And what 2 rivers is he talking about? Anybody? The Tigris and the Euphrates. And so Abraham is instructed to leave Mesopotamia. Get out of there and go on. So get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land that I will show you. And we know that ended up being the land of Canaan, the promised land. And so that's what he did. And that's what Stephen starts talking about. And then he talks about the sojourn to Canaan. And then he talks about the promise of the possession. It goes back to that Genesis chapter 12, Genesis 17. If you remember the covenant that God made with Abram. And this is a part of their history. And the covenant of circumcision, which was a part of the covenant. This is God dealing with Abraham and with other covenants. There are many covenants that God made with his people. And so Stephen goes into that. And then he starts talking about Isaac and Jacob. And then the 12 patriarchs, the sons of Jacob. And then in verses 9 through 16, as you read through there, verse 9, and the patriarchs, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with them. And what Jew didn't know the story about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And now he delves into Joseph, one of the great patriarchs. And he talks about how his own brother sold him into slavery. And so there's a discussion about Joseph's family, how he became well known to Pharaoh, and then and the whole story of that. And then we come to verse 17, and this is God's deliverance of Israel by Moses. And we're all familiar with that great story as we study the book of Exodus. Now, somebody in this congregation has shared with me and told me that their favorite book is the book of Exodus. So if you're here this morning, I'm hoping you're rejoicing with me, because that is one incredible book. It talks about the exit or the exodus of God's people out of Egypt, where they had been for over 400 years, and now God is going to deliver them through this man called Moses. And the Jews certainly love to talk about their deliverer. But verse 17, but when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, until another king arose who did not know Joseph. And this man dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so that they might not live. And then he just goes on and on about the whole story of Moses and how God raised this young man up to be a great deliverer and helped to bring the brethren out of Egypt and into a land flowing with milk and honey. Thank you. Flowing with milk and honey. In verse 30, when 40 years had passed, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in a bush in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. And when Moses saw it, he marveled at the sight, and as he drew near to observe, the voice of the Lord came to him, saying, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses trembled and dared not look. And then the Lord said to him, take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their groanings and have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt. And then we remember the story about Moses giving some excuses as to why he wasn't really the person, because he says, I am only a man of youth. And he talked about how he wasn't able to speak very well. And so God worked through Moses. God used him. And then there was this great deliverance out of the land of Egypt. And Stephen, prior to he's sharing this whole story. I just think it's intriguing the way that he establishes this common ground as he talks about their ancestry, as he reminds them of God using Joseph, Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and how he uses Joseph in the land of Egypt, and now he's going to use Moses to deliver them from the greatest land of that day. You're talking about the most educated people in all the land. It was Egypt. Culture-wise, the most intelligent, brilliant people of that day came out of Egypt. And look at verse 22. Look at verse 22. I failed to mention that to you. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Look at this. Moses was mighty in words and deeds. Moses, ladies and gentlemen, was a well-educated man. In spite of some of the things that he said earlier. Moses was educated in the highest culture of the day. God used this man to deliver his people. And so Stephen is relating, is reminding, and sharing, and talking about their common ancestry and how God used people. And then verses 37 through 43. Again, now we come to a part that we're all familiar with. The Jews' rejection, or the Jews' rebellious. They were rebels against God. Now look at verse 37. This is that Moses who said to the children of Israel, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren. Him you shall hear. Who's he talking about there? Jesus, right? This is prophecy. He's talking about the Lord Jesus. And it's interesting, when we get to the Gospels, the clouds opened up and God spoke from heaven, and God said, this is my beloved Son. Hear ye him. Moses knew that. Moses knew that there was going to be a prophet from among his brethren. And verse 38, this is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai and with our father, the one who received the living oracles to give to us, whom our fathers would not obey, but rejected. And in their hearts they turned back to Egypt. Now that's familiar to us because we remember the dialogue, we remember what was said back then. They said, why did you bring us out here to die? We were better off back in Egypt because of the leeks and the onion, and then they started talking about all the things that they were fed and how they were provided for. And now they're attacking